Ladies and gentlemen, damas y caballeros, thank you for joining us for another episode of All the Angles, the Business of Paddle podcast worldwide, powered by the Hexagon Cup. This week, our objective is to give you, our audience, a unique insight into the grand old continent of Africa. I'm joined this episode by Sebastian Brokmann, who is the founder and MD of Balwin Padel, which operates out of South Africa, currently has 2 venues and is opening another 10 in the coming months and years. Also joining me, I have Ibrahim Nofal, who has spent 5 years at Procter & Gamble, 2 years at Decathlon Egypt, and launched Egypt Padel Tour in 2020. So before we get started, if you enjoy this episode or have benefited from previous ones, please like, share, subscribe, it helps. So without further ado, gentlemen, let's get started. So let's start zoomed out. So Africa is a continent with about 1.5 billion people, so it's around 20-25% of the global population. And we don't really hear much about it in global conversations around paddle. Why do you think that is? Shall we start with you, Sebastian?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's natural. Countries with a higher GDP have stronger economies, higher disposable income, better infrastructure, all of which support development of sports like paddle. So it's, I think, natural that paddle has grown more rapidly in more developed continents. However, we do see a huge surge in the growth of the sport, and particularly in South Africa, where we are currently already on 720 courts. And we started here playing in November 2020. So yeah, it's growing rapidly. A lot of people talk about it. I think that's a global trend. So it's very trendy, hot, like former rugby legends have started playing. And yeah, it's growing rapidly. We anticipate a market size around 2,500 courts in South Africa. So it's still quite a long way to go. There's currently around 160,000 players, and population is 60 million. So it's a very small part of the total population. However, the demographics are quite different compared to, for example, the Netherlands, where I'm from. So yeah, I'm interested to understand Ibrahim's vision on this and how the sport is growing in his country.
So basically, I think you've covered one of the main reasons why it's still not similar to the growth where it is in specifically Europe, Spain, and then all the neighboring countries. As we are lower income and lower GDP and all of these economical factors, that's why it took us a while before we hopped on this roller coaster. That's how I'd like to call it. But we're getting there. We have other aspects that are making the sport grow very, very fast. Egypt, 110 million population. We're close to, let's say, we're the opposite side of Europe. So it's kind of not that far away. We're trying to get there. There's more European players come here for vacation, usually during the winter. So we're starting to benefit from these players who are coming here for their vacations. We're also right beside one of the hotspots in paddle in the world right now, which is the Gulf, and all of the investments that are being poured there. Most of the Gulf countries now have launched very lucrative leagues. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but Saudi has a very lucrative league right now, very lucrative championships for the locals and residents. That's how they like to call it. And before that, the country who led all of this evolution in the region was, of course, Dubai, and then Qatar now is also on board this. So coupling our closeliness to the Gulf and speaking the same language and rapid travels between all of these, let's say, neighboring countries, I think we're growing very fast too. Similar to the growth in South Africa, but we started a while back earlier. First courts appeared here in 2014, but they were not positioned in a, let's say, attractive way to attract or to introduce it to the community. However, we started to see the community here in Egypt hopping on board this journey, let's say 2017, 2018, and of course skyrocketed during the pandemic, 2020. This is where it skyrocketed and we have everything. Now, the statistics are saying between 220 to 250,000 people play and practice or have at least tried it more than 2 times. And then we have around more than 1,200 courts currently. I think the potential of the market here in Egypt is easily going to reach between 3,000 to 4,000 within the next 10 years.
And Ibrahim, can you expand a little bit on what brought paddle to Egypt? Who were the first people who brought it across? Who were the first people to started playing it? And has it evolved? You mentioned that between 2014 and 2017, there seemed to be a shift. Can you go into a bit more detail about how it was in 2014-15 and how it shifted in 2017 so we can get that understanding?
Okay, so basically in 2014, we had two different people who coincidentally thought of the idea of bringing it to Egypt. There's always a debate who was the first one to do it, but they were around the same time. It was early 2014. Both of them had Spain in the equation. So one of them was living there and came back to Egypt. The other one was there visiting a tennis event, and they were both acquainted with the sport. And one of them with a squash background and the other with a tennis background. So both of them previous racket players. That's usually where the sport starts. But globally, it's known more for the tennis background. And then they both sort of thought of how could, this is new. We are seeing it booming. Why is it not in Egypt? How about we just get two courts and put them somewhere and let's see how it goes. And that's basically how it started. So these two courts, one was put in a and they were put in high-end residential compounds. So because it was introduced as an elite activity or hobby for these people, and then these courts started there. One of them tried to attract tennis players, and these courts were placed right in front of a CrossFit venue. So basically, it tried to introduce more CrossFit players and whatever. But it was, let's say, not that appealing back then. Okay. And then in the region, 2016, 2017, as I mentioned, the Emirates, Dubai specifically, and one of the royal family members, the Prince of Dubai, was actually very excited about the sport. And he started, like playing it personally, investing, bringing a lot of Spanish coaches to coach them and everything. And that's where I think it became more, let's say, attractive for the community here in the Middle East, at least. And we started to learn more about it and see it and understand where does the sport come from, what is the World Padel Tour, and what's going on in the sport. And it started to become more attractive on the global scale too, with all of the, let's say, the commercialization happening specifically with World Padel Tour and all of their coverage, then the rebranding and the logo and all these kind of things, I think started to make the sport more attractive. In 2018, that's where the couple of private clubs here in Egypt, they started to incorporate it in their local activities. Luxurious hotels started to incorporate them, and this is where we start to see the let's say the rebirth of the sport here in Egypt. And a couple of enthusiast retired tennis players started to collect themselves daily and start to play, start to become better, start to organize like small meets and competitions, and they started to invite international players. We had a couple like Piquito, for example. He came here to Egypt, I think end of 2018 or 2019, and this is where the curve started to turn upwards and become more attractive for the sport. And then of course the pandemic, where all of the, let's say, public places were locked down, and only the courts, because they were started to be appear in luxurious compounds and residential neighborhoods, where people were bored because everything was locked down and they were so sick of staying home. Here we didn't have the stay at home that strict, so a lot of people started to collect themselves and let's say, okay, this sounds like a fun activity we can do, let's learn the sport. And this is where it skyrocketed. So basically, we have the pandemic to thank for the boom of the sport here in Egypt.
I think Egypt is not the only country that can lay claim to having benefited, quote unquote, from the restrictions or the circumstances around COVID. Sebastian, you mentioned, I think, 2020 as the advent or when paddle came to South Africa. So who was responsible for that, and how has the demographic of the people that play the sport evolved since 2020?
Yeah, so in March 2020, the first lockdown started in South Africa. So it was quite a challenging period, not only for South Africans, but across the globe. And in November 2020, and there was a Swedish guy, PK is his name. He opened two courts in Century City. It's in Cape Town. It's a suburb. And he invited quite some people to the opening. I was there as well. That was actually the start of paddle in South Africa. So everyone was looking for social connections again after this lockdown, and Also, various people looking to lose some weight. So paddle was kind of a solution for quite a couple of people. And then in Camps Bay at the Rotundas at the Bay Hotel, it's quite a famous hotel. There was like an indoor arena which they converted into one paddle court. And then, yeah, that was also a huge boom for people living Atlantic seaboard in Cape Town. So yeah, that was the start, was around, say, end of 2020, start of 2021. So Africa Paddle was the pioneer in South Africa. They currently are on 93 courts. So that's quite a substantial business. In terms of the people who are playing paddle, so obviously a lot of people who've played racket sport in the past, like from a tennis club, they like to start paddle, and you see a lot of people converting from tennis to paddle. So they, they actually only play paddle. I see it in the Netherlands as well. Like if you look at the top 10, a lot of these guys, they used to be the better tennis players in the country. So if you look at income levels, it's still kind of mid to high level income in South Africa. So it's not maybe as accessible as every other sport. And we are, as Balwin Paddle, are trying to organize it also for all different levels in the society. So we've been running paddle events for children from townships to promote the sport in those groups as well. And yeah, so as mentioned, there's currently around 700 courts, mainly in Cape Town, Johannesburg, and Durban. And yeah, it still continues to grow. You also see a huge group of people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who haven't played a racket sport, but they try it, and within an hour they think, wow, this is cool. And then the learning curve is quite steep. So you can become from beginner to intermediate, you can go quite quickly, and even to, say, semi advanced. So that we say it's easy to learn, difficult to master. And in our team at Balwin Paddle, we're very lucky and privileged. We've got one of the better players in the history of paddle, is Willy Lajos from Spain, two times world champion, four times Spanish national champion. He won also with Paquito 2014, the Spanish national championship. So he is, I would say, the head of paddle within Balwin Paddle. And he is coaching players from all levels, so including the most advanced players who we are trying to get to the Olympics, hopefully in 2028 already, and the next World Cup. So in South Africa, we didn't have a federation so far, but I received today the documents for nominations, and it's going to be set up in February. So at the moment, everything is still done on Playtomic. So all the games are set up that they have a monopoly here at the moment. So everything goes on there. They actually probably the best business in this country on paddle. But also the ratings. Everyone looks at the Playtomic rating, whereas in the Netherlands, where I'm from, originally you see the federation rating is more relevant because you can't really influence the results of tournaments. So yeah, this is still kind of young in a way, and still huge growth opportunity in terms of also professionalizing the sport. In terms of the level in South Africa, I know all the top 10 players. It's quite decent. I would say it's coming close to Netherlands, maybe just a bit behind because of less coaching. But the level is picking up. South Africans are very competitive. They love sport. And it started here originally as an outdoor sport. So everyone was playing outdoor. And now you see a small shift into indoor. So most people actually, if they can, they book indoor, even when it's nice weather.
And Sebastian, you touched on this sporting pedigree and sporting prowess to the development of African markets. So, for example, Egypt obviously performs well across numerous sports such as football, volleyball. South Africa has got decades of excellence across rugby union, cricket, athletics, football. Does paddle really tap into that sporting pedigree to really help it grow, to find a footing and then grow?
Yes, I think so, because South Africans are sociable people. So they love the concept, for example, of a braai, which is a barbecue, and they like to talk with each other on the street. It's quite nice to see. So I think they are kind of open minded and quite competitive. And paddle is, my daughter is 6 and my dad is 70, and we can play a nice game of paddle. which is a very small amount of sports you can play with this age group. So there is a huge market to tap into. So far, it's really taken off, and yeah, it doesn't seem like it's going to stop very quickly.
Ibrahim, from your side, what's what role does Egypt's fondness and success in other sports feed into the paddle phenomenon?
Basically, similar to the South African model here, with the Egyptian people, especially, we're talking about the middle class, they're all fond of sports and having their kids into sports. Almost all of the families, at least during their young ages, and starting from like when they're in kindergarten all the way to middle school, it's kind of a necessity more than a luxury. All kids have to be doing sports. And one of the things that have contributed to this is our, for example, global presence on the winners list in sports like, for example, squash. So we are the global leaders in the sport, and accordingly, you'll find we have thousands of young athletes who are doing this on a very, very, very competitive and professional level. And accordingly, we are taking this as a model, and we're trying to mimic, for example, for paddle. This is where actually the birth of Egypt Padel Tour came from, to turn it into a, let's say, a competitive and professional circuit tour, and use the model that was applied between the PSA and the Global Squash Tour and World Padel Tour too, to turn it into some kind of a very attractive, lucrative tour to encourage people to take it professionally. I saw that this sport would skyrocket once it turns into a professional sport. Not, I didn't want it to just continue being an amateur or leisure activity that people do after work or on Fridays here, because it's similar to your Sundays or whatever. And this is how we said, okay, guys, we want people to start investing, start training, taking it serious, doing the fitness, doing the footwork, investing in proper apparel and equipment. And they're not going to do that if this thing doesn't have a future for it, or they cannot make a living out of it. And this is how we started to like build on the knowledge and the experience and the awareness that was present in the sports market here in Egypt, and the familiarization with how squash, for example, could turn into an attractive sport for young players, and their families actually encourage them to do this because of it has a bright future. They can make good money out of it, and hopefully now squash players, they get like scholarships in world-class universities, and we're betting on that paddle somewhat in the near future can have a similar promising future for young paddle players in Egypt.
And of course, role models and ambassadors play a key role in the growth of sports, celebrities. For different markets, it's different people. In the Middle East, it might be a sheikh. In Italy, it might be a Formula One driver. In India, it might be Bollywood stars. So who are the kind of current or potential equivalents in the African continent who can really get the young people, the impressionable people, the buzz followers picking up a paddle racket? From your point of view, Ibrahim, who's going to move that needle?
Okay, so this already happened. We've seen globally world famous football stars playing the sport too. And for us and for you guys, I'm sure you're all aware of Mo Salah. He's one of the most famous players in the world right now, especially in the British league currently right now. When he's in Egypt, he's been captured, seen a couple of times playing the sport. And he's been playing actually in one of the courts near where I live. And the moment he's there, we get calls and messages like, you know what, Mo Salah is playing paddle at this place. So following what he's doing also, and most of his friends are, of course, football players. So a lot of the local stars here, and especially in football, they play the sport. On the other side, too, we have a lot of current and former squash champions. Right now, we have, for example, Rami Ashour, who used to be the world champion in squash. Now he's retired from squash and he's coaching, but he's been seeing multiple times playing. Him and his brother also were former top-ranked squash players. Both of them have been playing multiple times here, paddled with people in the community. So for me, I think football stars and former world champions in squash might be the key figures who can help promote the sport in the Egyptian market.
And Sebastian, in South Africa, who are the most prominent paddle players who are making everyone else stand up and take notice?
Yeah, so good question. At Balwin Padel, we have one of the best players from Spain over. His name is Willy Lajos, 2 times world champion, 4 times Spanish national champion. and he won the World Padel Tour with Bella when he was 43 years old. So he holds the title to be the eldest player of winning a World Padel Tour. And he is also a great coach. So he's been coaching for a long time as well. And yeah, people now starting to see, hey, he is not only very friendly, he's an exceptionally good player, because last year he won 9 tournaments playing against 20, 30-year-olds, and he's 53. So he is a legend in Spain. I've been to him in Spain a couple of times, and then I see the Galans and Lebrons, how much respect they have for him. And that's now also happening in South Africa. So he is actually one very key figure. Then we have some rugby legends like Ryan Kankowski playing paddle. And rugby is also very famous here, or very popular, especially with South Africa winning the World Cup a couple of years ago. So I played paddle here with the deputy mayor of Cape Town a couple of weeks ago, Eddie Andrews. Yeah, it was great fun, and he seems to love it. He's actually asked me to play another game next week. So yeah, it's politicians, it's sports celebrities, and I think also what we notice is that paddle is hot on social media. So as part of the growth is the drive on Instagram, and you see Lionel Messi playing paddle, or Cristiano Ronaldo is opening a club now in Portugal, investing 5 million. Now it's started in America. I saw a video the other day of Venus Williams playing her first time of paddle. So yeah, all these ambassadors globally also assist in the growth, in particularly in South Africa. And football is obviously a huge sport, and people like to see football players play. Now we've seen Beckham holding paddle records. Myself, I played against Ronald de Boer, former Barcelona player, and Rafa van der Vaart. He played for Spurs and Ajax. We played against them in September, and they absolutely love paddle. I think Ronald de Boer plays around 3 hours a day. So in the Netherlands, he is an ambassador for Plaza Paddle. It's quite a big company. I think they're running now 8 clubs. And yeah, this whole ambassador strategy is also part of our strategy of Balwin Paddle. So we have 18 ambassadors across the country, including like the rugby legend Ryan Kankowski, Willie Laos, but also the best players in the country. So the number one in South Africa, Jason Blakey Milner, he plays for Balwin Paddle as well. So when he is playing paddle, you see the logo on it. So that's part of our marketing and branding strategy. But this ambassador program is very relevant for the sport.
And how does the sport resonate with women in your respective countries or in the broader African continent? Do you find that it's a sport that hasn't quite been picked up, or is actually remarkably close to 50-50 in terms of participation and interest? How does it figure in your respective countries? Sebastian, go with this.
I think it's at the moment around 70-30. So it's 70% is men, 30% ladies. It is picking up within the ladies market as well, but overall it's more men playing still. I think that's a global trend. So it's not far off the global trend. Yeah, like my daughter's playing now. She started lessons a couple of months ago. She's loving it. She's 6-year-old. At the schools, there's only, at the moment, I think 3 schools in South Africa have paddle courts. So I assume when that picks up, that there also will be more girls coming through. Yeah.
And from your point of view, from Egypt's point of view, Ibrahim, how has the participation been?
So here I would like to differentiate between two different sectors of the people who play the sport. We have the professional ones, and then we have the amateur or leisure participants. On the professional level, it's like 90-10, for example. For a lot of reasons, I don't want to go there right now. But on the leisure side or the general participation or whatever, no, it's a very big percentage. I would say maybe 60-40 right now. Basically because it's an easy sport for them. It's easy for them to pick up. It doesn't require a lot of effort or physical abilities. And also it's becoming a very social sport where it's easier for a girl to play with 3 guys, or you have a mixed doubles or whatever. So it's something that they do like on an outing or a double date or whatever you want to call it. And it's fun. It's something both of them can do, which is a physical activity, not just like a normal board game or whatever. And it doesn't require that significant, let's say, skills to be acquired. So basically, for the people who are general practitioners of the sport or just do it for fun or doing it as a weekend activity, there's a high percentage of girls right now doing it, especially that it gives them the ability to do a shared sport with guys. That's you can't do that with, for example, football or basketball or all these other sports. There's a physical difference between men and women by nature. So here, that's why this sport paddle is becoming very popular among both genders to have a common sport to do together.
Understood. And you touched, Ibrahim, on the professional side of paddle. How do you feel the professional side is evolving in Africa? Obviously, Africa has the new Giza P2 event, which is highly visible, a vanguard event for the African continent. How important do you think the professional player showcase is to driving fandom and participation? And what do you think is the future of international or even continental and national circuits going forward in order to help the more serious, more professional side of the game?
Basically, until very recently, 2 or 3 years ago, Egypt is across all the sports. We always like to invite and host and showcase Egypt through sports across multiple sports. So we have, especially squash. We've had squash by the pyramids. We've had squash on the Red Sea and all that kind of stuff. We've had other multiple events. I've personally organized a couple of events across multiple sports. That's where my experience comes in the sports scene. We have basically use our rich history to promote sports, and that's what we do to attract world-class players, especially using the pyramids, for example. So we had an exhibition match this year for the new Giza P2, was held at the Grand New Egyptian Museum with the pyramids as the background. So these are the things we like to use, like in terms of commercializing and marketing and all that kind of stuff. Recently, during the past couple of years, this has declined due to, I'm sure you guys are aware of, the economical situation here in Egypt and the unrest in the region and a couple of other things, which has made it a hefty ticket price to host such events. But I'm sure once the economy starts to recover again, and now we're on the positive side of the economical growth and recovery, I'm sure we're going to see more events like this happening here. We're going to see more P events. We had a couple of FIP events happening here. The P2, I'm sure, I hope it still continues to happen. The new Giza one, and I'm sure we're going to have we had a lot of exhibition matches also, like I mentioned, between 2018 and 2022. So capitalizing on current world figures in the sport and bringing them to Egypt is going to promote the sport locally. And we're hoping that it promotes the sport globally too, through capitalizing on iconic destinations like the pyramids, for example.
And Sebastian, when's Premier Paddle coming to Cape Town?
Yeah, so quite interesting. We have had two A1 tournaments in Cape Town. So A1 is the private tour. So that was really fun. That's also how I met Willie Laos, by the way, and also some other pros. So that was, yeah, it was, in terms of people visiting the stadium, quite small still. So I think they invested quite a bit, but might have been a bit too early in terms of the numbers of people actually watching in the stadium. However, we are going to organize a FIP tournament in April. So that's the entry of Premier Paddle, which will be open for local and international. The prize money is not as high as a P1 or P2. But for us, the reason we're doing this is so people in South Africa can start earning points on the FIP ranking. Yeah, so that's our goal. I think that all the South Africans, quite fanatical. They all watch Premier Paddle when it's on. So they're all behind the TV. I see WhatsApps coming in. Did you see this shot? Did you see that shot? So it does help driving the sport a lot. And we also have some private investors here called the Durban Master. They organized a tournament at the Killarney Country Club. And there we had playing there as well. So yeah, he's a very strong player. So he won the World Cup for Argentina. So that was very exciting. there is that was, I think there were like 2,000 people in the stadium at the time, so it was quite a success. Yeah, so we also had some private guys organizing called the Durban Masters, and we had Chosas and Augsburger coming here. And yeah, it was hugely successful, really well received by both the fans and the ambitious players in South Africa. Um, I think that the FIP tournaments, potentially a P2, is something, what can happen eventually. Obviously, it has to also make sense from sponsors to come on board in terms of what they can get out of it. At the moment, there is 160,000 players, and yeah, we anticipate this will grow times three, times four in the next 4 to 5 years.
Got it. And so, Sebastian, you bring the next kind of set of questions, which is really about looking to the future. So, obviously, you mentioned right at the beginning about the GDP being a really important factor in the pickup of paddle in different markets in Africa. So, I think the four biggest GDP countries in Africa are South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, and Nigeria. So, the top two are on this call. We were going to have someone from Nigeria as well, Tunde from iPaddle Nigeria. So that would have been three of the four countries that are biggest in terms of GDP, seem to be leading the way, or are at least in pole positions for growing the sport. What do you think going forward? The growth in Africa as a market is impressive. 11 of the 20 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. So whether it's looking at paddle in Egypt and South Africa or looking at paddle on the continent of Africa more holistically, what do you think the future is for the next 5, 10 years of the sport?
Yeah, so if I can jump in there. So I think what you say there, the GDP is very relevant. So that's a key indicator for the growth of the sport. So yeah, there is countries in growing rapidly, not only in population, but also in terms of economy. And I am quite confident to say that these countries will also start loving paddle when it's there. So I can foresee quite a huge growth in the sport in the next 5 to 10 years. And well, in South Africa, where I'm based, I can already foresee that it's really only started. And if you look at Cape Town, where I'm staying now, if you look at trying to book a court now at say 6 o'clock, it will be very hard to get a court. And the market, there is more venues coming up, and the market seems to absorb it every time. So specifically indoor, a huge opportunity for indoor premium facilities with good offerings like food, good coaching, good hosts, and good tournaments, including international tournaments.
And Ibrahim, from your side, what's your perspective?
I think there's still a lot of room for growth in the continent as a whole, and in Egypt specific. I'm expecting between maybe 3x to 5x currently what we have right now during the next 10 years. And accordingly, also with the flourishness or the development of these economies and the enhancement or the improvement of their GDPs and their purchasing power, and let's say the availability of local producers and equipment, and the cost of practicing this sport will start to lower, because now basically it's a supply and demand issue. So for example, in South Africa, the supply and demand, what you're saying now is the supply is less than the demand, but you'll find that the prices are kind of maybe a little high, for example. Now in Egypt, it's kind of different. The growth and supply and demand is kind of slowing down a little. So prices now are becoming more, let's say, attractive and appealing. We have one of the cheapest rentals per hour in the world. We're now at around $6 to $7 per hour, which is very, very, very appealing for the sport to grow. But we're still not there when it comes to the cost of the equipment, especially the high-end equipment. And I think this is where it's still going to be an obstacle in the development of a professional paddle. On the amateur level, I think we're doing good. On the professional side, there's a lot of room where you have very high, expensive rackets priced at 350 to 400 euros. So that's kind of a little high for the Egyptian economy right now. And I think once we find solutions, or our national GDP, like you said, improves a little more, or we have more sponsors and people willing to invest in the Egyptian market, I think this is where the real power of this sport is going to prevail.
And what do you think is the key to unlocking young interest in the sport? School kids, school girls, through to universities. That, I think, for a lot of countries, especially the new additions to the paddle craze, they're very good at securing middle class, middle aged people who pick it up as a hobby. Some of them take it really seriously, or they get retired tennis players who look for a kind of a final chapter to their career by picking up the paddle racket and going down that avenue. I think the next big developmental leap is trying to really integrate paddle into school and youth consciousness. Is that the same for both your markets? And what do you think is the key to really unlocking that pathway for younger children?
So I'll reply here and jump here. Basically, what I see it, because I've seen this across a lot of sports, okay, previously, and maybe this is the behavior or the reaction of the young kids here in Egypt. Basically, when they see an ecosystem and a future, this is where kids, you can do something called lock to your customers. So once you feel that there's an ongoing activity happening, or there's regular tournaments, or they're getting acknowledgements from their let's say the community or the social media or whatever for an accomplishment they do, for kids, this is all what they want. They want to have fun, and they want to be acknowledged, and stand out among their friends and their peers and everything. Now, this can be only achieved when you have like a strong, let's say, national league, when you have sponsors there, when you have incentives from schools and universities, scholarships, whatever you want to call it, and when you have the clubs and the government subsidizing, providing equipment, providing training opportunities, establishing a nice local national team, and taking part in regional and world events. This is where a sport is going to grow, and this is where it's going to look attractive for young kids. Okay, we here I'm going to just tell you what we're happening here. We have a federation, luckily, that was established maybe 2 years ago. In 2021, this is when we started it, 3 years ago right now. And then we started taking part in, of course, the World Cup. Egypt qualified the first time to the World Cup with the men's team, and last year we qualified with the women's team. And also we've started taking part with the juniors. And honestly, this is something I see happening here that's good, that the federation decided, okay, look, we're not going to invest that much in the professional circuit for the older people, and we're going to focus our investments on the young generations to build a nice base for the upcoming, let's say, 5 to 10 years, where we're going to start reaping off these efforts, having a strong national team. Here they launched a program called the Road to 1000, which is I think it's a good initiative, where they're investing and subsidizing and providing coaches and providing good training opportunities for kids. And we started to launch also initiatives with schools. So we go to schools, they incorporate it in the university games, they incorporate it in the schools games. So all of these things now, I think, are going to, during the next couple of years, we're going to start seeing the effect of these efforts taking place, where more and more kids start playing it, more and more families encourage their children to play it. And then hopefully within the next 5 to 10 years, we start seeing Egypt on the global platforms and competing, hopefully, within the top players of the world.
And Sebastian, from your side, how do we get the youngsters in?
Yeah, so I think Ibrahim mentions very good points in terms of the federation. So that's one item, which is launching in South Africa next. Secondly, is have courts at the schools. So at the moment, as far as I know, they are max 5 schools who have paddle, and if you're looking at the court cost to book a court check as a normal club, it's still between 20 and say 35 euros an hour. So if you pay that as a parent for your kids, it's quite pricey. So yeah, we are starting some school leagues at our club, and we're trying to get the courts full during off-peak hours at slightly reduced rate. So this is one of the initiatives, and yeah, I mean, what I see is that my daughter started playing. What it brings to her within a short period is very nice to see. So from the moment she had the racket into her hand to actually playing kind of a game is quite short compared to sports like tennis or golf. So yeah, so more courts at schools, one, school leagues at clubs, better pricing for kids, and yeah, I think all those things will assist in growing the sport in the younger age. And also, like
Yeah.
kids like heroes. So, for example, kids like to watch Cristiano Ronaldo score a goal. They like to see Messi. You see paddle at an Olympics in a full stadium, and they see Galan and LeBron. They think, hey, this is cool. So I think hand in hand with the overall growth of the sport will also grow youngsters.
Yeah, fair point. We're on to our last one or two question. We've talked a lot about what can happen in the future, what needs to be happening in the future of African paddle. Since the listeners of this podcast are international, how do you think international stakeholders and international businesses and international interested parties can participate and support in what is going on in the paddle scene in Africa?
Sure. So we have, I think, maybe three different pathways to get the global stakeholders involved, I would say, in Africa. First, I think supporting with talents, specialized coaches, professional players, and all these kinds of things, like initiatives to promote the sport and to help develop the levels. Because, for example, like here currently in Egypt, we don't have any foreign coaches, and I think this is kind of a challenge that we have right now. Like I told you, due to the economical situations and a couple of challenges that we have right now. So basically, I think what would develop this is we have like a development program, or stakeholders would like to, let's say, help develop the talents here in Egypt with professional coaching and good talents from Europe, which we are very close in exchange. You know, they get the chance to live in Egypt and learn from the culture and see the culture and have nice weather and all these good things that we like to talk about. The other thing is, in terms of equipment and sponsors, I see that the big brands, they have a big role in developing sports to open their markets. Basically, like this is how the sponsorship model works, and they need to invest more to make their brands and their products available in these markets. And this only happens by global initiatives also to sponsor and partner with the local tournaments and the local academies and courts. And finally, I honestly believe the power of networking, especially through the sport. This is where either professional paddle players and paddle leagues and paddle championships and all these kind of things, they put the continent as an objective and a target, that they make it on their list that we need to be present in the continent, and we need to have our tournaments and our competitions take part in these places. Okay, because we do not have the same ecosystems like Europe right now, and we're not mature enough as the sport there. So we need some, let's say, aids and subsidization options so that we can still continue to host and have such events happening here, or it can be part of like camps and destinations for them during their off seasons and their trainings to come here and benefit from, let's say, good weather and a good atmosphere and all these type of things. So these are the three axes I believe that the global industry and the global stakeholders of the sport need to put into consideration if they want to see a continent like Africa, its presence on the global platform in the sport.
From your point of view, Sebastian?
Yeah, so I think looking at sponsors or brands that are involved in paddle, one of them, for example, they're quite active sponsoring Galan, Bea, and they have an office in South Africa. So they are also sponsoring various paddle clubs, various other sporters, and so in South Africa is number 39 GDP in the world. It's slightly stronger economy than most other African countries, which means that there's also potentially more interest from brands to get involved in this. So I mean, ultimately, to get people like the best players in the world over, you're looking at the P1. The prize money for P1 is at the moment 500,000 euros. So that's quite substantial. That's 10 million rand. And to get there, it has to make sense for people, brands to willing to invest in these tournaments. So I think that for us, that is kind of a long-term vision. There's an opportunity, but potentially long-term. In the shorter term, I think that it's going to be more focused on the P1s, potentially an exhibition match with some famous players who can come over for, say, a week or weekend to give clinics. So yeah, I think that federation set up. I know that, for example, where I was at Qatar at the World Cup, there was a meeting with all the different federations. So the Federation of the Netherlands there, the Federation of Portugal or Spain. So they are collaborating and trying to work together. But yeah, ultimately to make it worth, say, a Galan's while, it also has to, that's going to cost quite a bit. So he's playing now this weekend in Miami at the Reserve Cup, and then the prize money is $1.7 million. So, yeah. So then Chingotos and the Galans and the Lebrons are very excited to come and visit America. So I think for us, we we can grow the sport with slightly lower tournaments, but I think eventually, like in the next 5 years, we hopefully can do say a P1.
Yeah. And last question before we sign off. What would you like to see improve in the region? Are there any roadblocks that currently exist or that are developing that you think are really critical to really unlock the full potential of the sport in your respective countries or in Africa more generally? What do you think, Ibrahim?
The roadblock currently right now is, let's say, learning from the people who have took further steps or more experienced people in the sport. Basically, we would like to see the appetite from former, let's say, international players or experienced coaches or even current young players, their appetite to say, okay, I'm gonna go for, let's say, a vacation in Egypt. How about I manage to play while I'm there and all that kind of stuff. I think these type of things, of course, it's a big responsibility on us here and the locals to promote and to reach out also, but we would like to see this happening. I've seen a couple of the international players. They come here in Egypt, and suddenly they just ask like the hotel they're staying in, where's the nearest paddle court or whatever. And they just go there. They train their own trainings separately, or ask the like the local coach at that tennis club or whatever. How about you come and play a little paddle with me? For me, I would like. This is a couple of things I've talked with a couple of other people, especially in the region. We do like a group or a forum or whatever, where if you're traveling to this country, please connect with the local, let's say, leading tour operator or competitions operator or whatever, or leading community leaders, and we'll find you proper players to play with. Like once I was in Sharm el-Sheikh in Sinai, and then we just found out, surprisingly, that there was a whole Italian group of clubs or a league or whatever, and they had planned a trip and like a 3-day competition it's like a tourism company, and they incorporated a paddle tournament in it. And somebody was like, are you here for the Italian Cup? I'm like, what Italian Cup? And they even reach out to us, as the locals, and this is something I think like would enhance the growth of the sport locally. And I was like, okay, guys, next time you come, just let me know. I'll be happily inviting a couple of the local players here who are actually good levels, and we can have like say a mixed cup or whatever, or an exhibition match with the champion of your cup with the local champions, whatever. I think these type of things, when we all connect together and see how we can benefit from these people actually being here, would help the sport a lot. And I think currently this is kind of a roadblock where, I don't know, is it a language barrier, or I don't know if we're not promoting our sport, the country on the sport international scene that more. But hopefully that would have been overcome with having a premiere here in Egypt. And also I think locally or regionally, countries like Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya now, all these, Ivory Coast, we're seeing the sport booming in all these countries, and each one is there's a lot of investments pouring in. Why don't we join forces together? Why don't we have joint competitions? We have the more wealthier countries attract the less wealthier ones, or let's say we have options of exchanging programs between us countries to help the continent at least grow all together rather than each country taking its own initiative and trying to grow.
How would you close, Sebastian? What needs to change? What do we need to get rid of in terms of obstacles?
From my side is that we are on Balwin Padel, and we are in the process of council approvals for indoor, and that's been taking quite a long time. So some of the items already been won. So um, my request would be, council, could you please move a bit faster? So I'm not sure if they are watching, but yeah, no. So I think that is one thing in terms of if there's an opportunity for the government to support with some financially to put courts in less privileged areas, that would be fantastic. So that's something as well, which I find personally very exciting. I actually really enjoyed giving that pedal lesson to kids from a township. Was really fun to see. So yeah, if we can do more of those kind of initiatives, that would be great. So obviously we're commercially interested, but to do something back in that kind of way would be fantastic. And I think it's a great way to grow the sport.
Well, I think that's a great place to end this episode. Again, please like, share, and subscribe if the content was thought-provoking. Please comment on LinkedIn or Twitter if you have any recommendations around our format, topics we should devote an episode to, and questions we should ask speakers we simply have to bring on. We want you, each of you, driving the next phase of this industry's future, to tell us what you want to hear about and who from. Thank you, Sebastian and Ibrahim, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We will keep doing our best to cover all the angles of the business around paddle, episode after episode. Until the next one.